RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. Protecting you and your home against all forms of home invasion.
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today I have returned to talk to the co-author of the groundbreaking, critically acclaimed multi-volume series covering British UFO sightings since 1940. Volumes 5, 6 and 7 have recently been released, which cover 1972 to 1979. Here to talk about Haunted Skies is John Hanson. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Richard, for allowing me the opportunity to talk about the books again.
Okay, now just the last book that I mentioned there, Volume 7, you've actually published that yourself. Just tell us about that.
We decided to branch out on our own. Sadly, of course, it meant terminating our association with Mr. John Downes, but for which I'm extremely sorry for, because we think the world of him and Karina. And as I said before, unfortunately, we could not afford to keep paying out. So I've set myself up as Haunted Skies Publishing, okay. And effectively, I am now in control of these
right.
books. So
from Volume 7 onwards, and there's going to be quite a few volumes to take us up to the present day.
Unfortunately, yes.
The number of volumes keeps growing.
Yeah, I just hope that I can live to that particular length of time to finish these damn things.
Because the project keeps growing, the more you're involved with it.
As one makes various inquiries about UFO reports from the 1970s and 80s, there are always people that will telephone you and tell you about reports. I mentioned to you before about the letter in the National Association of Retired Police Officer magazine. It took me some time to get that in there, but appealing for any information, and we had quite a very good response from
this is a recent venture.
Superintendents downwards, who told us about sightings in the late 1970s and the 1980s, and further on.
Now, you mentioned police officers, and you are an ex-police officer and ex-CID officer, so you investigate these cases through a police officer's eyes.
Well, I investigate them with a large dollop of common sense, and as we've discussed before, at the end of the day, you've got to make your own judgment on people. So far, fairly all of the witnesses that I've spoken and interviewed seem, a lot of them are very professional, they're sane, they're rational, and all they want to do, because a lot of them are very passionate about these sightings, they just want to tell you what they've seen and make of it what you will.
And you're cataloguing that very comprehensively.
I am, because I think it needs to be catalogued, because it is part of a very important British social history, and really it is not about me, it's not about Dawn, but it's about the people. These things shouldn't be forgotten.
And just to mention, John, typically this is I've got Volume 5 here, which is 1972 to 1974, and you're talking a few hundred separate UFO sightings in each volume. So you're talking thousands of cases, or it will be thousands of cases across the whole series.
Well, that's the frightening part about it. It's that contrary to recently expressed public opinion that UFOs once again are as dead as a duck in a water, nothing, of course, could be more from that.
Yeah, and obviously some cases are evidentially strong, others not so.
Well, that's right.
But this we were discussing off camera, that John's sort of objectives, if you like, are different than mine. John's trying to catalogue as many cases as he can, both the strong evidential cases and the weaker ones, whereas I'm really interested in sort of the strongest evidence, if you like.
we both have the same goal, but perhaps different objectives. And I understand what you're saying, and although we didn't come to fisticuffs, I understood what you were saying. And you're quite right, of course. Evidentially, single witness sightings aren't always the strongest. Multi-witness sightings are the best. Of course, Alan Hynek himself said that years ago. But at the end of the day, you are left with a lot of single witness sightings, and a lot of these sightings, they're not embellished. They're straightforward accounts of pretty strange things seen in the sky, and you have to form your own judgment on these people. But,
because what happened was I wanted to cover 2 cases from each of the latest 3 volumes, and we were sort of disagreeing on which cases we were going to choose. I think you were probably wanting to choose the more colourful cases, shall we say, whereas I wanted to choose the multiple witness cases with just more plausible evidence. That's what I was looking at.
I know.
So we've kind of come to a compromise on what we're going to talk about.
That's right.
All right, well, let's start off with a case in 1973 in Kent, UFO over Kent. Kent resident Peter Hildebrand and his friend John were fishing on the beach at Grain in Kent on the 24th of November 1973 around midnight. Peter's friend brought his companion's attention to what he thought was a fishing boat out at sea, about a mile away, showing very bright light. So can you take it from there, John?
Okay, well, these guys were on the beach and they were out fishing, and they saw a light in the sea, which they first took to be a fishing vessel. And then it advanced towards them, came up onto the beach and over the portable light they'd got, enabled him to see a classic saucer-shaped object. The object hovered over the portable light they'd got, and it was clear that this wasn't a light, it was a saucer-shaped object, which then moved off towards the direction of Sheerness, and they lost sight of it. That always reminds me of a similar case at Sizewell, some years before, where a similar sort of thing happened. The guy was out with his dog, and this thing came out of the sea, hovered above them.
Was there any sudden movements with this craft, or was it just moving slowly?
No, it was moving slowly, as in fact most of these objects are. Again, a man contacted me about a similar incident when he was a young man out with his father in Ireland, and he said this thing was next to the bush, saucer-shaped object next to the bush, 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and it was making this ticking sound, tick 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 ticking sound, as if it was some sort of creature or something, and then it moved slowly away, and his father confirmed that that's what they'd seen.
Do you think the disc and saucer type sighting has diminished since the 1970s, and we're getting more triangle objects now, would you say, or not?
Not necessarily, because sometimes the saucer-shaped object can quickly take on the shape of a triangular shaped object.
Right.
You know, I do have reports of that. Bell-shaped object. We have a lot of bell-shaped objects seen in the Essex area. Certainly there was an upsurge of triangular UFO activity, and I really do detest that word, because it's triangular, except it's triangular in shape, but sometimes it's triangular lights which are set at equilateral distance from each other, and many people will refer to them as triangular. But then if you go back into UFO history, you'll see that a lot of people have described seeing 3 lights, as indeed Colonel Holt did at Rendlesham, 3 lights in the sky. And so this common denominator of 3 puzzles me.
All right.
But then there's other cases where the black triangular object moves over almost a shadow without any lights. Sometimes it has lights in each corner, and sometimes those lights will go out, and a lot of people will think that it's gone, but it is actually still there. So, but it's rich and varied, isn't it? Triangle.
Let's look at another case from Haunted Skies Volume 5, and this time not specifically really a UFO encounter, just sort of high bizarreness, if you like. Close encounters at RAF Alconbury. Just tell us about Alconbury and the strange things that have been witnessed there.
Right. Well, Alconbury, we had a number of airmen contact us one way or the other over the years, and who'd served at Alconbury, and some of them had what you might call paranormal experiences. I think on one occasion somebody was doing some repair work inside an aircraft, and he saw what others believed was a humanoid, a hairy humanoid walking along the runway. This guy was really frightened. He was very traumatized by it, but eventually he told his colleagues about it, and other reports came from servicemen, retired servicemen, who'd been there, and actually there was an intruder alert, and they'd confronted this being,
this hairy humanoid.
This hairy humanoid. Again, hairy humanoids, you know, your first impression is, oh, this is funny, hairy humanoids, you know, shades of Dracula and werewolves. They can't exist, can they? But, you know, it's amazing how many people have seen them and they don't find it funny. They find it terrifying. Well, these guys saw this
hairy humanoid.
Yeah, inside the airbase, and they set the dogs on it, and the dogs were so terrified they peed in fright.
So you've got witness statements from these soldiers?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, okay.
Well, ex United States Air Force personnel, or plus security police.
Security police.
And they discharged their, one of them discharged a pistol at it. And I don't know if he was a good shot or bad shot or what, but this thing then just galloped over the fence, and away it went into the nearby Monk's Wood.
Right. Well,
Monk's Wood is an area where we carried out some investigation there, and there'd been several strange things seen there, including monks.
Right.
Oddly,
right.
But well, not oddly, but Monk's Wood is I have no idea, you know, why you can associate one phenomenon with the other, but I'm quite satisfied.
Tell us about this chap at Alconbury who was in the observation tower, and he heard children's voices.
That's right. They were quite frightened because these guys were in the observation tower on the high tower on the perimeter fence, and you know, they were there on night shift, and on one or two occasions they heard the sound of children talking and laughing very loud, but it did certainly unnerve them. Because
just interrupted there, John. Is there any nurseries or schools anywhere near there?
No. This is a
middle of the night
military camp. Yeah, I mean, there's no kids at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was.
Right.
And this didn't unnerve one. And the one man told us he wondered if it was to do with it was rumoured that some children had been died in a train crash, because there's a train line not too far away. Well, we managed to track down the actual report which had occurred in, I think it was 1898, when the Flying Scotsman was en route from past. Well, it wasn't the base then, was it? But was en route, and it broke down, and then another train hit it. And then another train hit it. Now, I can't be 100% sure on what hit who, but it's all in the book. But sadly, 6 children died, and it's quite chilling to read in that Victorian journal.
So this was in close proximity to where this tower was?
It was very close, yeah.
Right.
When I say very close, half a mile or something.
If we just consider that evidence, assuming it's correct, assuming those children did die horrifically and that person has heard this, what people immediately jump to, John, right, with that is, oh, well, they're obviously ghosts, right? That's what people assume.
Well, we can't say that,
no.
can we? I mean, you and I know that you can't say that, but if you couldn't leave that out, you couldn't leave that evidence out.
Let me just explain why I think people get the cart before the horse on what people think might be ghosts, right? I don't think modern biology has worked out how long-term human memory functions. There's nowhere in the brain where they can pin down where a long-term memory is held. Therefore, if you look at the work of Rupert Sheldrake and people like that, they claim that the memories, long-term memory, is held outside of the mind. So if those children are having a horrific experience, they will have a memory of that immediately before they've died, and perhaps that memory is a very intense memory. So if that memory is not held in their grey matter and it's somewhere resonating in space, perhaps
yeah.
it's possible for someone to tune in to either a memory or something which people refer to the Akashic record. And I think that we have to first understand really the true function of human memory before we start saying that was a ghostly activity. Do you see what I mean? That's where I come from on ghosts.
I agree with you, but I'm qualifying, if you like, the investigation by saying that is what we found out. In Monkswood there's some sort of government establishment. I think they cultivate plants or something. Nothing high powered, but we spoke to the security guard there, and he told us that people had seen shapes and monks walking through the building. And I'm not saying there may be no connection at all, but just one other point about that, John, that about when people generally describe what they term as poltergeist type activity, generally if there's been a death, it's always, you generally find that it's someone who's died in a traumatic way. So that for me that might produce a more resonant memory for someone to then tune into in the future. I'm just hypothesizing here. I'm not saying that I'm right. What I'm saying is I don't think people who immediately say that's a ghost, they consider the evidence properly. As I say, you can't do that, can you? But a lot of people will do that. They'll think there's a connection. Well, I'm not saying there is a connection. I'm just saying that the evidence is that the guys who said they heard children's voices, and as you've said, there was no. We've agreed there was no nurseries, there was no schools nearby. As far as I know, there was no children died in circumstances of suspicious circumstances or whatever. We take that out of the plot, but what we do know is that there was a train crash and that 6 children and some adults lost their lives, and so who knows? You know, I mean, but some people will say, well, we'll add it up, and 2 and 2 comes to 5, and they're happy. Right. But I don't know.
All right, John. Yeah. Well, we'll talk more after this.
RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. Protect you, your family and your home against possible future civil unrest. RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk, manufacturers of instant protecting you, your family and your home.
I've come to Barrow upon Humber, and I'm with Michael Bourne, and he saw my documentary called The Lincolnshire Triangle, and he had a UFO sighting not long after that, and the UFO that he spotted was very similar apparently to what I reported in the documentary. So just first off, Michael, are we in Lincolnshire here?
We are. Well, North East Lincolnshire, yeah.
North East Lincolnshire, okay. But we're right on the north sort of side of Lincolnshire,
we are, yeah.
Okay, so just in your own words, just describe what happened.
Well, if you held out an egg in front of you, and that egg was illuminated, say like an orangey glow to it, and that's what went whizzing across the sky.
Okay, so you were facing east out towards the sea. Yeah. You were in the marketplace in Barrow on Humber.
Marketplace, yeah, and this object sort of shot across the skyline about 30 degrees in elevation.
Right.
Very, very quick. So no sound either.
So if you're facing east and it goes right to left, it was heading north.
Yes, it was coming from the south, heading north.
Right. Now, just south of you, in fact, and slightly east, is North Somercotes.
Yes.
You've heard of that place? So that is where the
that's right. Well,
wind turbine incident took place.
Yeah. Well, I'd seen your show, and that was over that way. And then when I saw this object, because I thought, whoa,
right,
because it was night, dark. All I saw, as I said, this object size of an egg, whizzing by with no sound.
So, and could you guesstimate as to how far away you think it was?
It's got to be. It could have been sort of like 3 to 5, maybe.
Right. So at that size, and at that distance I can make a rough calculation to give an approximate, and I've actually done a calculation in my head. If something's say 2 mile away and it's the size of an egg at arm's length, it's going to be hundreds of feet in size. Did you get that feeling that this thing was a huge...
Well, it was definitely something big,
right,
because it was a long way away,
right,
and it was going very, very quick with no sound.
Right. Now what about the actual edge of the object?
You couldn't really tell the edge. It looked like as if it fuzzed in, if you know what I mean.
So it wasn't a perfect crisp edge.
No.
Then. There was fuzziness to it. All right. And how long in total do you think you actually the sighting last?
Well, it was going very quick. So by the time I focused on it, looked at it, it just about gone. So we're talking sort of 1.5, 2 seconds. Right. Okay. And would you be able to estimate as to how far it travelled in that time? Well, it traversed the whole skyline.
The whole skyline. All right. And have you thought about any other conventional explanations as to what it might have been?
Nah, nothing could fly like that. Nothing.
Right. All right. And did you hear any sound at all?
No sound.
So just your gut feel, Michael, do you think this is terrestrial or non-terrestrial? What would your guess?
Well, this isn't from our planet now.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look at that telegraph pole there, and then look at that chimney pot there, and the speed that this thing got from there to there, this is about the speed it was going across from that spade. It was going from there, and it was gone there.
Welcome back. I'm talking to John Hanson about his series of encyclopedias on UFOs, Haunted Skies, and we're now going to look at a few cases from Volume 6, which covers 1975 to 1977. The first case we're going to look at is from Broadhaven in Dyfed in southwest Wales, which took place in 1977 at a school. And allegedly what happened was some saucer-shaped craft lands at the school, witnessed by a lot of school children and a teacher.
That's correct, yeah.
Can you expand on it, John?
Well, we were interested in this case because I'd spoken to Tony Pace, who's a really nice chap, and he's ex-director of investigations with Bufora, recently retired, but he'd gone down there himself in the late 1970s, and he'd got round and seen some of the children and spoken to Randall Jones Pugh, who was a vet by employment but was also an investigator for Bufora, and he lived in a place called Roach. Dawn and I trekked down there. We went to the school, we spoke to the headmaster. We're talking about 10 years ago now, and he showed us a diary that the children had kept. It was still there in the school, and we trawled through that and read some of the letters, and then we tracked some of the boys down that had seen this object.
Who were now adults.
Who are now adults, yeah. Some of them were happy to speak to us, others were a bit reticent because they really didn't want any further publicity on it, but they all said that's what they'd seen.
So,
but we managed,
the flying saucer lands at this school, and the teachers sat all the kids down who saw it, and there's a very interesting picture there of all the kids with their pictures.
That's right.
That they've independently drawn, and when you look through them, John's collected several of the children's images.
We've got the original ones here. Of course, the problem with the book is, and as I explained before, with Volume 8, these books are going to be in colour, and because you don't get the depth in grayscale.
There is variation in what the children have drawn, but they're clearly, I would say, they're drawn the same object, which does look like your classic sort of flying saucer. And this area, John, seemed to have a high degree of activity in the late 1970s. St Bride's Bay, which is the very far west tip of Wales.
That's
and there's
correct.
A rock out in that bay.
Stack Rocks.
Stack Rocks.
And there's
where
been sightings from there.
Sightings of people witnessing a disc-shaped craft as if going into and being swallowed up by Stack Rock.
And also allegedly humanoids clambering on the surface of the rock itself, which, you know, from my point of view, I have to say, even at this stage of research, I find it difficult to believe, obviously, because one does, but when you interview these people and they tell you about the occupants, as indeed Rosa Granville from the nearby hotel, she saw a landed craft with an occupant at the back of the hotel, and she ended up writing to a member of parliament. And
was she the one that was visited by someone from the Air Force and interviewed by them?
She was, yeah. There was an awful lot of sightings of entities, and some of them were probably hoaxed, mind.
Right. Of the entities,
I
would go along.
Some, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them
I think
probably were.
There's more than one witness case of people seeing a UFO flying into the side of this stacked rock, and I think in his book Peter Paget suggests that they're perhaps, I could be wrong here, I'm not sure if it's suggested in the book, but they're possibly going down and under the ground or under the sea.
Under the sea, yeah. And I mentioned to you before that some years ago I spoke to somebody from the local diving club that had, he said, I don't think it was his version of events, but he spoke to a colleague, and I couldn't get into the colleague, but to cut a long story short, that they'd been at diving by Stack Rocks, and his colleague said to him, "You'll never believe what I've seen. There's actually a steel door set into the rock at a distance down, which
under the water.
Again, that doesn't necessarily corroborate the fact that aliens are coming in and out of the rock, but it's Stack Rocks. But it's telling us that if that's true, well, there's something in there that
I think there's also a series of explosions which were taking place around that time, which no one could pin down to either an earthquake or an earth tremor or any kind of blasting.
Mystery bangs and explosions.
And people have suggested that was hollowing out some underground base underneath southwest Wales.
Yeah, may well have been, yeah.
It's in Peter Paget's book that when he went to the school, it had said in the newspaper that only the children had seen the UFO land and take off.
No, some of the teachers had.
But the teacher then pulled him to one side and said, actually, the teachers saw it as well. It's just that we didn't want that to go in the newspaper.
Well, that's
so
right.
The teachers were prepared to admit that they'd seen the UFO privately, but not to the press.
Yeah, but Mr. Randall Jones Pugh was the investigator that interviewed the children, and one of the first children he interviewed was David Davis.
Yeah.
But do you want to pass him over to you? That's Randall Jones Pugh, and that's Dawn. Sadly, Mr. Pugh has passed away, but he was involved very much with this, and always felt that it was. You're talking about something very religious here and something demonic.
He thought it was demonic.
He was demonic, and he was at great pains to tell us during our short interview with him that we should get Holy Communion and we should go to the church, and I don't know, maybe he's right, maybe it is demonic.
So tell us what
finished.
What allegedly happened then, John. How long was it on the ground for? What did it do? What did this see?
Well, first of all, the object was on the side of the side of the hill. At the top of the hill is a church, an abandoned church. I don't know if it was a derelict church in 1977, but if you can imagine that it's a small school. It's opposite a Baptist church, and a short distance away, slightly up the hill, over a stream, the stream that runs down the side of the hill, was where this sighting took place, and the object and its perceived occupants were there for at least a few hours, and then I've no eyewitness account of it actually going, but it was certainly the kids saw something highly unusual, and very interesting case. But not too far away, of course, is the Fort Haven Hotel, where Francis and Rosa Granville and her Rosa's husband lived, and that was where the sighting of the craft and the occupant, which is just on the other side of the hill, and then you've got other sightings locally as well.
I know that it has been quite heavily debunked in various documentaries, especially this spaceman that supposedly was standing outside someone's window, etc. But the number of people who have seen discs at that time in that area is very hard to dispute.
Well, I'm going to be blunt here. So my father was a Yorkshireman, and I would say that if these people that make these documentaries got off their backsides and went down and interviewed these people properly and carried out some accurate research, they would find that a far different picture would emerge, and that is what good research is all about. And you know, I'm convinced that this wasn't just the work of a member of the local Rotary Club that put on a fireman's uniform and walked around frightening people. The Pauline and Billy Coombs, who this is the photograph we took of them, they had an entity or a humanoid stand at their window.
This is Ripperston Farm.
Yeah, Ripperston Farm.
They also had animals
they did.
Being moved.
Yeah,
and
that's right, yeah. And it was quite clear, if you'd gone and looked at the farm yourself, if you'd looked at the window, you know that you'd have to be about an 8-foot tall man,
right,
to even shown on that window.
Okay.
Right.
And interestingly, it's not the only case of a UFO landing at a school.
We have other cases.
Several in your book.
Yeah, other cases are outlined. You almost get the impression that the UFOs paid a lot of activity towards schools in 1977.
Right.
Whether it's because that's just a coincidence that people at schools saw them, a bit like saying if you get a flurry of reports of UFOs at 11 o'clock at night from people that are turning out of pubs, is there any relevance to that? In the same way that is there any relevance to the UFOs taking an interest in schools? I just don't know, but there was a lot of reports of these things overflying the schools.
Okay. And let's just look at another case which took place in Dyfed of a lorry driver, Francis Lloyd.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the cases that I didn't want to choose, but you did.
Did I? Well, that's only because I've known Francis,
okay.
And I've been to see him. And, well,
Francis Lloyd from Broadhaven, Dyfed, was proceeding towards Nanticourse Hill.
It was going down on Nanticourse Hill, yeah.
On the A48 southeast of Carmarthen, accompanied by Francis Dwyer, the son of the haulage company he worked for. As we neared a junction halfway up the hill, we both saw, caught in the glare of the lorry's headlights, the weird sight of two figures standing at the side of the road, approximately 7 feet in height. They reminded us of guardsmen at attention. They were dressed all over in what looked like red perspex. I've never seen anything like them before. They weren't human beings. They are far too tall. I just carried on and didn't look back.
Mr. Francis Lloyd was the only man I'd met over the last 20 years that told me about a sighting like this and described humanoid entities like this. I might think to myself, not sure whether I can actually believe that, but why is it that I've spoken to probably 30 or 40 other people that have seen similarly described objects, entities at the side of the road?
It also adds that a few hours later, a UFO showing two lights over the coastal town of Silverdale near Morecambe, Lancashire, at an estimated height of 4,000 to 5,000 feet, an identical object showing 4 lights and something apparently attached to it, was seen a short time later over Cartmel, 30 miles away.
Right,
so it's associated with a few nearby UFO sightings. This guy's...
Well, continuing on from that, there's a number of multi-witness sightings by police officers.
Right, over the Lake District?
Over the Lake District, over Kendal. And I spoke to most of the officers, and you know, you have to speak to them, interview them, albeit I know it happened many years ago, but I did have the copies of the original Bufora reports, which are in there, and they certainly saw what you would say is a triangular UFO.
I'll just read out this. It's a sergeant, police sergeant. It came to a halt over a nearby hill, allowing us to see it closer. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck start to rise. Sergeant Clifton decided to contact the police control room at Penrith and report the incident, who confirmed they had received a number of calls from the public about the UFO, and that inquiries with the RAF and air traffic control as to the identity of this object were negative.
I suppose roughly you'd have, I know we talked about weak and strong cases, but we would probably be heading towards something like, I don't know, 20,000 sightings in accumulated sightings. Yeah. So if 10,000 of them is strong sightings, and a lot of them relate to triangular objects, one's bound to ask, really, we don't know what they are and where they come from, but one is bound to ask, what the hell are they?
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
All right, well, we'll be discussing some cases from Volume 7 after this.
RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. InstaShield for your quick, simple home protection. RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. At last, home protection that really works.
Right, I'm now in East Sussex, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, East Sussex, and I'm at Hailsham, and I'm with Frank Mewett, who witnessed something in 2010, just over 2 years ago. This was, what month was it, Frank?
I think it was November, but it could have been October of...
October, November 2010?
Yeah, yes.
Right, so this was an early morning sighting, so just tell us what happened that morning.
I got up like I normally do, about 5:30, go to the bathroom, get ready to take the dog out. Walked up the jetty, across the road, went up Tilehurst, and I approached the top corner and I heard a humming sound. It didn't come from any distance, it seemed to come suddenly. It attracted my attention. I turned around and saw this thing in the sky. I walked a few more yards and stopped because it moved over across the road to the bungalows. And I just stood there and looked at it. My dog was nosing around in the grass and taking any notice, and I just looked at it. I was absolutely dumbfounded. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Big object, flat, I think it was round, a lot of lights. Like a kaleidoscope, like swirling around this thing, and I just dumbstruck. They seemed to be about 200 feet, maybe 300 feet off the ground, and it moved over the top of these bungalows, and I stood there watching it, and then I found myself at the other end, by perhaps 70 or 80 yards further on the road. All
right, so if we just stick on the sighting itself for the minute, so you told me on the phone that it covered both of these bungalows. Is that...
The bungalows are about, I would think, about 30, 35 feet across, and there's a gap between them which is about another 30 or 40 feet, and it dwarfed those.
Right.
It was above the tree height, stepped back a little bit, and just stood there for a moment, and I looked at it and I thought, nah. I thought, I'm imagining this, it's got to be lights, or something else. And I found myself further along the road.
Right.
And when I turned around, it was gone.
So, any feel for what direction it came from, or where it came from?
It came from my right, that I'm sure of, because as I approached the corner, the sound came from behind my right shoulder, and when I turned around, it was coming across to my left.
We're fairly near the coast here, are we?
About 7 miles, 6.5, 7 miles.
So did it come from inland or east, west?
I would say it was, what's that, north up there, so northeast, northeast, something like that.
From the northeast?
Yeah, because I think that's north up this way,
right.
And it came from, yes.
From northeast?
That's only guessing mine.
Did you see it move at all, or was it just...
It came from my right, and it moved and stopped over the top of the bungalows. And I looked at it. As I noticed, I heard the noise, and when I looked at it, the noise stopped, and it just moved silently across the road, and just settled for a moment. Not very long, and I found myself over the other, further along. I looked around, it was gone.
Now are you familiar with the Alan Godfrey sighting? If you're not, I'll just fill you in. 1980, police officer, he saw something with swirling lights, sounds similar to what you've said, probably not as big as what you've said, and the guy finds himself a few hundred yards down the road and doesn't know what's happened.
There was no missing time with me.
So there was no missing time?
No.
And you've asked your wife about that as well?
When I came home, I said to her, I've just seen a UFO. And I think you asked me, or Dave Hodgwin asked me in an email, was there any missing time? And I asked my wife, and she said to me that no, I'd just been my normal time.
Right. Okay.
So whether anything had happened in the time I was stood on that corner to the time I moved the other end, I couldn't say, but it would have to be very quick.
Right. And was this object shining anything down to the ground, or did it appear to be
No, the lights, I noticed that the lights, although they were sort of bright, they didn't emanate down. There was no light shining. This is what I couldn't understand. There was no light coming down like a rainbow.
Right.
And all the lights, they're sort of all mixing together.
Right.
And it seemed like they were going round.
Right. Okay. And what would you guess the shape was?
I thought it was round.
Right.
But I
think say round, you don't mean spherical though?
No, I mean sort of flat and round, like a sponge.
Right. Okay.
I think that's the best way I can.
So possibly a thick disc then, something like
that.
Right.
Yes.
Now then, Frank, how far are we from Alfriston here? Do you know Alfriston?
Yeah, Alfriston is about 12 miles away.
That's very interesting because
where the long man is.
Yeah. Yeah. Right
Wilmington.
there. Right where that long man is, Alfriston. I was in a farm on the 24th, 25th of October 2010 because there was a horse mutilation case. 2 weeks prior to that horse mutilation, one of the people on that farm witnessed a disc above the field, next to the field where the horse had been mutilated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you'd be talking mid-October. So it's 12 mile away. Someone's witnessed a disc. I've got that guy's testimony. I can't remember his name, but I can maybe pull that video out because we're not that far away, really.
See, I've doubted this. I thought I was going off my trolley,
right?
But I certainly didn't imagine this, and it certainly wasn't an aircraft. It was huge,
right?
And there was a slight glint of metal there, metallic object, but.
So your own gut feeling, who did it belong to?
Well, it wasn't an aircraft carrier or an aeroplane or anything. I've never seen anything like it before.
Now, volume 7 here contains an extra 100 pages. Can you tell us why you had to put 100 extra pages?
It's 100 extra pages because our friend Dan Goring from Earthlink, he used with the Essex group. Here he is. Yep.
Earthlink is a UFO research organisation.
Yeah, well, that was the magazine that Dan produced. He very kindly, as we were completing the book at 320 pages, sent us a little bundle here of reports that had never been published before.
Okay, right, great. So he sent you this.
And there are some more, excuse me, so, you know...
All from that period, late 1970s. These are UFO reports,
that's
predominantly
just
from the Essex region.
From Essex, yeah.
Yeah.
So they had to go in. And
so all of these reports have been condensed into volume.
They've all gone in.
Yeah.
We leave nothing out. So they've gone into the back of the book. So that's 420 pages.
Right.
Now we are having some not problems with volume 8. But of course volume 8, and I think we might have mentioned it before, it's going to be in colour. All books will be in colour, but I might have to slightly increase the price on volume 8 because I can't sell books and have to run at a loss. So we might have to slightly increase that to cater to the fact that it's colour, to cater to the fact that it won't be 320 pages because at least 250 pages is the Rendlesham incident.
And 250 pages on
250 pages will be the Rendlesham stuff. Okay. And then the other 150 pages will be January to November UFO sightings, including the Alan Godfrey case. And there's a lot more in there about Alan that people will not have read about before. Right. Not specifically Alan, but about...
So this is volume 8, which is yet to come out.
Well, yeah, that's just a rough...
right.
That's not the completed cover, but if you want to...
Okay. So this is what John's
that's just
working
a
on at the
tatty
moment.
thing, but that's how it's going to look.
Okay.
If you look on the back, you'll see.
And we've got Rendlesham and the Godfrey case in this upcoming issue.
And we have a recommendation from Colonel Holt.
Approved by Colonel Charles Holt, who was the Deputy Base Commander of the...
He has approved all of these books.
Right.
As worth reading.
In volume 7 at the beginning, there's a report on the United Nations UFO debate with Jacques Vallée, a very prominent UFO author, and Hynek there, the little spook that he was.
Pardon?
Well, he's a flawed...
You have to be careful, Richard.
He was the government physicist, wasn't he, who was an arch debunker.
Well, he was to start with. Yeah, he was to start with.
Yeah.
As indeed probably...
So can you give us a brief précis of what happened at this UN UFO debate? Gordon Cooper there, the astronaut.
Yeah, that's right. The one that's passed.
Because he wrote the famous letter to the United Nations.
He did, yeah. I mean, but the Coyne case was very interesting. Lieutenant Coyne, where they 73 was it?
Okay.
73, the helicopter. There's if you look at the back of the book, isn't that a helicopter image or something of it or not? No, that's the Livingstone 79.
Right.
No, that's another case. I always remember when Dr. Hynek said, Alan Hynek said, the biggest problem with this subject, we are too rich in imagery. And I suffer from the same problem. We are too rich. We have too many fantastic cases, and weak and strong. We have so much, and yet when you think of the debate at the United Nations, Pete Robbins said to me that as far as the newspapers were concerned, they weren't that interested. I think on that date there was a mayor in New York was murdered, or somebody was murdered. The papers were full of that, quite rightly, but the debate went past unnoticed.
So what was the actual conclusion of the debate? Was there any actions made from it?
There were suggestions, but nothing was implemented. Because
from volume 7 onwards,
we've set up a search inside facility.
A search inside facility,
so
which means you can
read the pages.
Yeah, look up the book on Amazon, and you can actually read
inside before
sample
you buy
pages from the book.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of cases in each volume, so
too many really.
We're just scratching the surface here. But thanks very much,
thank
John,
you very much for
being on the show again.
Yeah, thank you.
And
well, I was driving a van at the time, Vauxhall Valero, I think it is, and quite a big window, and in the corner was what I'd call a penny-sized globe.
Right.
Which initially thought it was the moon.
Right.
But then I realised the moon was this way.
Okay.
And every corner I went round just followed me round every corner.
You told me earlier that it had quite crisp edges, so just describe that for me.
It almost seemed flat.
Right.
Not actually a circle, but flat.
Right.
And pulsing like a very pale orange, pretty colour.
And could you estimate the distance and the size of this thing?
I would say it was the size of one of those shuttle buses.
Right.
And it was way off there.
Right.
I'd say 100 yards from me and then above the trees. So. Okay,
so the road you were on, just describe that. Is it a straight road? Is it a windy road? Is it
very, very windy, sort of.
Right.
Yeah.
And what? And it
completely stayed the same place the whole time.
Right. So you felt it was following you there?
Yes, and I actually said, please don't ruin my electrics.
Right. So
I was frightened to death.
You thought this thing was maybe going to interfere with your electrics, and did you experience anything?
No, nothing.
Right. All right. So how long did it last for then? How long did it?
Well, I've worked out it's 4 miles, and then pulling in.
All right. So it's probably at least 5 or 6 minutes then.
Yeah.
All right. So what were you feeling when you got to your home?
I was scared to death.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I actually thought that something was going to happen.
Right.
So I was shaking when I got out the truck.
Right.
And then I looked up, and then I saw it more clearly, and then it just, like a light switch.
So it just went out? All right. You didn't see it go anywhere?
No.
It just went out? Okay.
No, there was no...
So when you were observing it, did you feel there was something solid within it?
Yeah.
You did? Right. Okay, right.
It's almost as if it knew where I lived.
So it was in front of you then?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and a skeptic might say, well, if the moon was out that night, you've just mistaken it from the moon. What would you say to that?
The moon can't go round corners.
Right. You were telling me about news report the following day after you had your sighting, so just tell us about that.
Well, after telling my friend that laughed in my face, she phoned me up the next day and said that her son had read the local paper claiming to have 9 sightings.
Right.
So this made me really thrilled.
RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. InstaShield, protecting your most valuable assets.
Terminating our association with Mr. John Downs, but for which I'm extremely sorry for, because we think the world of him and Karina. And as I said before, unfortunately, we could not afford to keep paying out. So I've set myself up as Haunted Skies Publishing, and effectively I am now in control of these books.
Right, so from volume 7 onwards, and there's going to be quite a few volumes to take us up to the present day.
Unfortunately, yes.
The number of volumes keeps growing.
Yeah, I just hope that I can live to that particular length of time to finish these damn things.
Because the project keeps growing, the more you're involved with it.
As one makes various inquiries about UFO reports from the 1970s and 80s, there are always people that will telephone you and tell you about reports. I mentioned to you before about the letter in the National Association of Retired Police Officer magazine. It took me some time to get that in there, but appealing for any information, and we had quite a very good response from
this is a recent venture,
superintendents downwards, who told us about sightings in the late 1970s and the 1980s and further on.
Now,
public opinion that UFOs once again are as dead as a duck in a water. Nothing, of course, could be more from that.
Yeah, and obviously some cases are evidentially strong, others not so.
Well, that's right.
But but this we were discussing off camera, that John's sort of objectives, if you like, are different to mine. John's trying to catalogue as many cases as he can, both the strong evidential cases and the weaker ones, whereas I'm really interested in sort of the strongest evidence, if you like.
We both have the same goal, but perhaps different objectives, and I understand what you're saying, and although we didn't come to fisticuffs as such, I understood what you were saying, and you're quite right, of course. Evidentially, single witness sightings aren't always the strongest. Multi-witness sightings are the best. Of course, Alan Hynek himself said that years ago, but at the end of the day, you are left with a lot of single witness sightings, and a lot of these sightings, they're not embellished. They're straightforward accounts of pretty strange things seen in the sky, and you have to form your own judgment on these people. But,
because what happened was I wanted to cover 2 cases from each of the latest 3 volumes, and we were sort of disagreeing on which.
RichPlanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. Protecting you and your home against all forms of home invasion.
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today I have returned to talk to the co-author of the groundbreaking, critically acclaimed multi-volume series covering British UFO sightings since 1940. Volumes 5, 6 and 7 have recently been released, which cover 1972 to 1979. Here to talk about Haunted Skies is John Hanson. Welcome, John.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Richard, for allowing me the opportunity to talk about the books again.
Okay, now just the last book that I mentioned there, Volume 7, you've actually published that yourself. Just tell us about that.
We decided to branch out on our own. Sadly, of course, it meant...
cases we were going to choose. I think you were probably wanting to choose the more colourful cases, shall we say, whereas I wanted to choose the multiple witness cases with just more plausible evidence. That's what I was looking at.
Yeah, I know.
So we've kind of come to a compromise on what we're going to talk about.
That's right.
All right, well, let's start off with a case in 1973 in Kent, UFO over Kent. Kent resident Peter Hildebrand and his friend John were fishing on the beach at Grain in Kent on the 24th of November 1973 around midnight. Peter's friend brought his companion's attention to what he thought was a fishing boat out at sea, about a mile away, showing very bright light. So can you take it from there, John?
Okay, well, these guys were on the beach and they were out fishing, and they saw a light in the sea, which they first took to be a fishing vessel. And then it advanced towards them, came up onto the beach and over the portable light they'd got, enabled him to see a classic saucer-shaped object. The object hovered over the portable light they'd got, and it was clear that this wasn't a light, it was a saucer-shaped object, which then moved off towards the direction of Sheerness, and they lost sight of it. That always reminds me...
You mentioned police officers, and you are an ex-police officer and ex-CID officer, so you investigate these cases through a police officer's eyes.
Well, I investigate them with a large dollop of common sense, and as we've discussed before, at the end of the day you've got to make your own judgment on people. So far, fairly all of the witnesses that I've spoken and interviewed seem, a lot of them are very professional, they're sane, they're rational, and all they want to do, because a lot of them are very passionate about these sightings, they just want to tell you what they've seen and make of it what you will.
And you're cataloguing that very comprehensively.
I am, because I think it needs to be catalogued, because it is part of a very important British social history, and really it is not about me, it's not about Dawn, but it's about the people. These things shouldn't be forgotten.
And just to mention, John, typically this is I've got volume 5 here, which is 1972 to 1974, and you're talking a few hundred separate UFO sightings in each volume. So you're talking thousands of cases, or it will be thousands of cases across the whole series.
Well, that's the frightening part about it. It's that you know, contrary to recently expressed